Yo te aviso, Rodrigo. En un momento, apenas va a enlazarse con YouTube.
Y hay que estar pendiente cuando David se una, que le den acceso a la sesión.
Ok.
Ya estamos en directo, chicos.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Thank you all for joining us today on this session. Very important session that we are glad to have today on opportunities for journalists in Latin America. Getting their voice out in international media and other opportunities outside of the region. So I'm glad to have an amazing set of panelists today. We have Debbie Ponchner from Knowable magazine, Rachel.courtland from MIT Tech Review, Lauren Wall from Nature, Thierry Carpenter from the Open Notebook, Lynne.Walker from Historias Sin Fronteras from InquireFist, and we'll be joined later by David Malakoff from Science. I want to give each of one your opportunity to introduce yourself and then introduce your organization, your outlet, your project. But I just want to preface this by saying that I wish I had listened to this panel some years back when I was just starting out as a science journalist, when I had no idea how to pitch, how to write a pitch to propose a story, or how to write an application. Siri can tell you later when she first saw my application for the Open Notebook fellowship. I think I have improved a lot since then, but back then I had no idea how to do it. I didn't have anyone to turn to know how to do these things. So I'm so glad that we have such a panel today with all these experts that can help anyone who's tuning in how to do this. So let's begin with Siri, actually, from the Open Notebook.
Hi, everyone. It's great to see you. Thanks so much for being here. I'll just start to share some slides for a few minutes. So I wanted to, that's weird, my slides actually just disappeared on me. Excuse me a second, I'm not sure what's going on, but they're not showing up for me, which is very weird. I'm so sorry. Well, I'm going to just skip doing slides. Instead, I'm just going to talk. So I am the co-founder and editor-in-chief of the Open Notebook. The Open Notebook is a nonprofit that was founded in 2010. We have a mission to help science journalists improve their skills. And we try to do that in a number of different ways. We've published more than 500 articles on the craft of science journalism. A number of those articles, as I will discuss, have been translated into Spanish. We also offer numerous mentoring programs, online free courses, and workshops. And in 2020, we published our first book, The Craft of Science Writing. So what I wanted to share with you today that we do that I think might be relevant for your needs are, first of all, I wanted to highlight our collection of Spanish translations. Our Ton en Español program, which Rodrigo directs, and Debbie is an editor in, is a collection of currently more than 70 of our articles that have been translated into Spanish. If you go to our Ton en Español link, which I think is going to be dropped into the chat, Ton en Español articles cover the gamut of what we have published. I wanted to highlight a few articles that might be especially worth checking out for you when it comes to thinking about planning stories for pitching and actually pitching stories. The first of those is an article that Rodrigo wrote back in 2017 when he was one of our fellows, about the challenges that writers face in working across international boundaries and breaking into international media outlets. Another article that's part of that collection is an article that Humberto Basilio wrote just last year that is about how writers who aren't native English speakers can break into international media and can work effectively with editors at English language publications. And then finally, there's another article that we published last year by Celia Ford, who was another one of our early career fellows. Oh, and I should have mentioned Umberto is one of our current early career fellows. Celia Ford was also one of our fellows, and she wrote a story last year on how to decide what publications to pitch. Finding the right outlet for your story can feel overwhelming and daunting, and particularly if you're a newcomer to the field. And in this piece, Celia provides a guide to finding a good match for the story that you have in mind, getting to know a publication well enough to pitch it, and pitching outlets effectively. So those are a few of the articles that are in our Ton en Español collection, but as I said, there are more than 70, growing every day, and huge thanks to our Ton en Español team led by Rodrigo for creating those and making them possible. We also have a couple of mentoring programs at the Open Notebook that I wanted to call to your attention. Neither of these are currently accepting new applications, so this is just something for you to bear in mind for the future. The first is our Early Career Fellowship program, the one that I've been mentioning that Rodrigo was part of, for example. This Early Career Fellowship program is supported by the Borough's Welcome Fund. It's been going for about a decade now, and applications for that program normally open in September. That program is a very intensive, mentored, 10-month remote, part-time, paid fellowship program. You get currently it's $7,500 per fellow for that work. And over that time, you write articles for the Open Notebook, you meet weekly with your mentor, and you are part of a Ton Fellowship Community Slack group. So that's the Early Career Fellowship program that is open to early career science journalists anywhere in the world. The only requirements really for applying are that you want to be or you are a science journalist, and that you have less than 2 years of experience writing about science for the public in English. So if you have been writing for 2 years already or more in Spanish, then you are still eligible to apply for that program. The other mentoring program I wanted to mention is a brand new one, the Sharon Dunwoody Science Journalism Mentoring Program. It's named after the late, great Sharon Dunwoody, who was a mentor to legions of science journalists for generations. Really a wonderful person. This new program is also open to both US and international science journalists. We just recently closed applications for it, but it's something that we hope will continue to be funded, and you can watch for further opportunities down the road. So you can find information about both of those mentoring programs on our website under mentoring programs. I also wanted to mention our Science Journalism Master Classes series. This is a series of free online courses that are delivered by email. They're free because they are supported through a generous grant from the Kavli Foundation, which means that you don't have to pay to take these classes. You can sign up for a class and begin right away. There's no set start date. As soon as you sign up, you will get a welcome email, and then you will start getting the emails for the actual lessons for the courses right then. Currently, we have 4 courses published. We have 3 more in the works. The courses that currently exist are a course on finding angles for science stories, a course on pitching science stories. And if you decide to take those courses, I do recommend that you take one and then the other. Don't try to take them both at the same time because they're pretty intensive. We also have a course on spotting hype and misinformation in science. And our newest course is all about how to cover a study story. So how to cover an individual study for like a news story. We have other courses on the way. There's the one that we're closest to publishing right now is on centering people in science stories. The next course after that will be a course on how to own a beat, how to develop a beat in science journalism. And then we don't know what the next one after that will be, but we hope that we'll be publishing these courses for years to come. Finally, I wanted to just leave you with letting you know that you are welcome to pitch stories to the Open Notebook. We only publish one story a week, so we do not have a huge availability, but we do take pitches and frequently publish stories that were pitched to us. The guidelines for pitching articles to the Open Notebook are on our website, and I would just encourage you to follow them. So that's it from me.
Thank you so much, Siri. And if anyone has questions about this panel, please make sure to post them on the YouTube live stream in the chat, or you can also post them on Twitter and with the hashtag of SAPeCCT2023. And we will be monitoring social media for your questions. And just after Siri, I also want to tell you, everyone, that you can also ask me questions about the Open Notebook or how to apply for the fellowship. All right, next we have Debbie Ponchner, great friend, who just helped launch a Knowable in Español some months ago, right?
Yes.
And it's been great. I know I love Knowable. I interned there when I was a grad student, and I was so happy to see that they now offer a version in Español. So please tell us a bit more about that.
Thank you, Rodrigo. So a little bit about Knowable in Español. So as you can imagine, it's the Spanish version of Knowable. Knowable is an online news outlet that was launched in 2017. It's a publication by Annual Reviews, but it's independent, journalistically independent. And what we do is cover science, but we don't cover necessarily the news about science. We go a little bit more in deep, and it's not that, it's not the weekly news on science. It's more about what we want to explain what it's about, go deeper into the science. We are very curious, and we always want to leave our readers with a little bit of something they didn't know before. So it's very interesting. We write about all topics. We can see the next one. So this is just our website. This was our website last week. Now we have another story up there. We publish around 2 stories per week. Some of them are translations from the articles in English that we translate into Spanish. We can keep on going down. We have different, as you can see, we have different topics that we see from what we eat and how to make our food more sustainable, to asthma, saliva, but we also see things about society and others. Can we go further down, please? So you see, we have various topics that are covered. Let's go down, please. And as you see, these are different topics that we cover. We can keep on going down. We also have, besides the translated articles, we have original articles written first in Spanish that are written by science journalists in Latin America. If I have some examples here, if we can show them. Well, these are opinion pieces that we also publish. In the case of the opinion pieces, these are articles that are written by scientists, but they're very interesting, but they are written by scientists, not by science journalists. The others are all written by science journalists. Can we go down? So this is an article that was written by Federico Cuxo, a science journalist in Argentina. And not only do we publish the original article in Spanish, but we also translate it into English, and then it's shared and read by all our audience. We can keep on going. This one is by Pablo Fonseca. He's in Costa Rica, about green hydrogen and how the hype of green hydrogen around our region. You can keep on going. This one is by Alejandro Portilla. He wrote about how birds, and this is a specific species, but then we had some other examples of how birds have to change their song in the city because of the noise we do. This one is by Emiliano Rodriguez Mega from Mexico, and he did a Q&A with the anthropologist Alicia Bader on how to carry out DNA research with people that are not longer alive, and how we do this in an ethical way. Let's go on. This one by Pablo Correa is about the history, the evolution of our tropical forests. So as you see, and we can keep on going. As you see, we have several articles that are written by science journalists in the area, and as you can imagine, we are open to pitches to commission these articles. This one is by Matias Lowy in Argentina. Let's keep on going. And the other thing is that we publish everything under Creative Commons. So anyone can republish our content. And we can go on quickly. These are a few examples of different websites and media outlets in the region that are republishing currently our articles. This one is Ojo al Clima in Costa Rica. We have examples of Salud Bajo la Lupa. We also have El País from Spain and others. So if you're interested in republishing, you can go to our website, and as you see down there is the link where you can see the guide to republish. We can go further down. And just like I wanted to share with you a few links if you want to follow us. You can see we have, you can subscribe to our newsletter. They will show you that link soon. And you can also follow us in social media and look for us on the web. That's from El Espectador in Colombia that republishes our content. It's one of our partners. And that's all from me. I mean, we can see those links if we can get to them, and that would be it.
Great. Thank you so much, Debbie. Yes, we are posting all the relevant links from each speaker on the chat on YouTube, so you can also go back and check out those links. There's submission guidelines. There's the email from editors that you can pitch. And one thing that I really like from Knowable is that they're accepting or publishing original content in Spanish now, right, Debbie?
Yes.
So we hope we get a byline from someone from Chile that they get inspired now to pitch to you, right?
Sure. Looking forward to it.
So many stories from there, everything from the Atacama Desert and microbes to all the observatories they have. Right. Next up, we have Rachel. Hi, Rachel. Rachel is an editor, commissioning editor at MIT Tech Review, which is a great publication. And one of the really best stories I read on the COVID origin was from Jane Chu from China, right? And this was a story from from a freelancer who was on the ground, and I think she got access to a lot of sources that it wouldn't be possible for another journalist from the US or maybe from other country to get access to, right? So I'm also interested to know, of course, your perspective on why is it important, right, to have these freelancers in other countries that come up to you with these kinds of stories.
Thanks, Rodrigo. Yeah, no, it's very important. I think, so my job at MIT Technology Review is to work directly with freelancers. So I do that both for the website and for the print magazine. And I think that, we're continually trying to get more international voices in the publication. And the difference between a reporter trying to report on an issue remotely and a reporter who is not from a country, who's trying to report on the country where they currently are, and a reporter who has deep experience in a particular country is vast. So I would encourage you all to consider pitching MIT Technology Review, to read the magazine to get a better sense of the kinds of things we cover, and to think about what issues in your community or in your country might be things that should be brought to a wider audience. So I thought to start things off, I would just talk a little bit about what MIT Technology Review covers and the various kinds of stories we do, and then step back a little bit and talk more about just the art of pitching, which is definitely an art. It takes a long time to master. And there's some people who have been doing it for many years and still find it quite challenging. So MIT Technology Review is an editorially independent publication that's affiliated with MIT. And we cover basically all of technology, and that includes a lot of science, basic science, biotechnology, technology related to climate change, science that could eventually have an impact on technology and our daily lives. And we want stories that are about technology itself, but we're particularly excited about those areas where technology and humans collide, where technology meets the real world. So we have two main outlets for stories. One is the website, and the other is a print magazine that comes out once every 2 months. And the print magazine has basically 3 sections. It has a front of book where we run short stories, including short profiles. The middle is the feature well, where we run features that are usually between 2,500 and 4,000 words. And then we have a back of the book where we run reported essays, book reviews, and things of that sort. So the themes for the print magazine are usually set months and months in advance. The ones coming up toward the end of the year are on ethics and hard problems. And we're in the process of looking at pitches for those both now. And the pitches, those themes are just for the feature well. The rest of the magazine has a wide range of topics. We also have a website where we run stories every day. And those can be short news stories, sometimes breaking news, and they can also be long narrative features and investigations. So there are many different outlets for writing for Tech Review. Often an easy way to start is to pitch us something short, like a news story or a short front of book piece for the magazine. And now, I should also say that our word rate, so we pay between $1 and $2 a word, depending on the story, depending on some other factors as well. And if you want more information about just what I've discussed in these kinds of stories, you can if you go to the MIT Technology Review website and you go to the very bottom, there is a link that says Write for Us, and that will take you to our pitch guide with all of this information. So I also wanted to talk a little bit just about pitching in general. So I think, like the essentials of a pitch are very simple. It's, what is the story? What is the story? Why is it important? And why are we writing about it now? And you might be surprised that many pitches don't have those essential elements. And I think one area where pitches sort of fail is they don't have a clear top line or a clear idea of what the takeaway of the reader should be. If you find yourself struggling writing a pitch, a good way to kind of break through is to think about how you would headline the piece. If it ends in a question, if it's just kind of a general kind of question, chances are that you don't have a very clear idea of what your story is about. Another thing that we often see is that writers don't have a good sense of what the publication runs. They don't have a sense of what kind of stories they do or how it would sort of fit into the existing coverage areas, or sometimes writers will pitch stories that we've already done. They haven't gone through and looked to see what's been done, or they pitch a story that like another publication has already done very well, and they don't explain how their story would be different. Another thing I often see is that pitches don't really showcase the quality of your writing. I think this is more important if you're pitching something like a feature, but you need to give your editor a sense of how you would tell the story and how you would make it engaging to the reader. It doesn't have to be particularly long or complicated, but if you can't grab the editor in a few paragraphs, then the editor might not have a lot of confidence that you will be able to grab the reader. And I would also just say, be patient. Pitching takes a lot of practice, and you may have to try a few times sometimes many times to get into a particular publication. Editors have very full inboxes, and sometimes it may take them a while to get back to you. And when they do, they might not have time to give you the kind of substantive feedback that might be very useful for you to improve your pitches. So just, be kind to yourself, take some time and don't be discouraged. The last thing I would say is, one question that comes up a lot for us as an international magazine is what kinds of stories sort of rise to the level of international coverage. So, for example, I get a lot of pitches about the effects of social media in various countries, and it's very hard to know why I should focus on the effects of WhatsApp scams in one country versus another. What makes it a story that an international readership will be pulled into? And I would say that's a tough question that I think I certainly am still negotiating, and I think a lot of editors at other international publications negotiate with. So the more you can try to make a case that your story rises above just a local kind of issue, that it has larger implications, the stronger your pitch might be. All right, that's it for me for now.
Thank you so much, Rachel. That was very good to have like a scope of like basically a very quick guide on how to pitch international publications. Next, we have Lynne.Walker, who is leading great scholarship or grant opportunity called Historias Sin Fronteras, and I was there with Lynne at the World Conference last week, and there was some exciting news about a new story that 3 journalists from different countries are doing. Yeah, can you tell us a little bit more about Historias Sin Fronteras, how it came to be, and what's the whole deal, and what are you hoping to promote in Latin America?
Well, thanks so much, Rodrigo. I'm really happy to be here with you and all of our colleagues. Historias Sin Fronteras was launched in 2019 at the World Conference of Science Journalists in Lausanne. It was a pilot project then, but we have grown this initiative into a wealth now of stories published by journalists, science journalists, and some who are not so experienced in science journalism throughout Latin America. Our focus is bringing journalists together and working as teams from different countries. We are really emphasizing and underscoring cross-border journalism. We believe, as you can see right here with the wording, we believe that there is strength and power in working together across borders as journalists when we all bring all of our knowledge and experience together, it results in tremendous science, health, and environmental stories. So our project requires that journalists work in teams. They make their proposals in teams, and those teams have to have journalists from at least 2 countries in Latin America and no more than 4 journalists on the team. So minimum of 2, maximum of 4, at least 2 countries represented. And, you know, we started this in 2019 before COVID was even a word. And we were already working on Zoom across borders to put together some really powerful stories. And when COVID happened, we didn't stop. We just kept right on going. And what you're seeing as this scroll down goes on, these are the stories we've done. You see Trapped, Atrapados, the pink dolphins of the Rio Madeira, you know, agriculture in the Andes region and transgenics. The international highway proposed by the former president of Brazil, which would cut right through the richest part of the Amazon. And so we think we're pushing the boundaries a little bit here by getting journalists to work together across borders. I'm happy to tell you that since we launched in 2019, the projects produced by journalists who have worked with us at Historias Sin Fronteras have been published by 40 media organizations. Not all the projects and by all the media, but we have gotten a tremendous range of interest and publication. We're proud of that, not for ourselves, but for the journalists who work so hard on these projects. And it says what the value of the work they're doing is to editors across the region. We have published in publications from Canada to Argentina, and we're just going to keep on going. Here you see our current team. That's one of our current teams that's working on a project. Cristian Asensio is the first journalist from Chile to be working on a project with Historias Sin Fronteras, and his colleague, Robert Orjuela, is in Peru. And so there again, you see this cross-border project. They're each working in their own country on a mutual topic. They're really close. We think we'll be publishing at the end of April or early May. We're very excited about that. If you scroll down, you can see some, we have the logos of all the media organizations that have published the journalist work. We also require a pitch. We've tried to make it as simple and streamlined as possible, but the elements that Rachel just described are all there in our request for a pitch. Rachel mentioned a headline. Yes, we want the title for your project. It helps you focus in just a few words. What is your project about? We request a general description of the project, 300 words max. That's where you need to put in a really tight pitch, really focused. We give the general categories. Exploration and conservation of the ocean, or oceans, plural. Well, that is a humongous topic. How exciting within that, if you've got an idea, an ocean conservation or exploration, this is where you pitch it, but make it really focused, really tight, and really compelling. In those 300 words, you should have a beautifully written piece that gives us a very clear idea of what your story is and how you would write it. I want to stop there and give you a little postscript. We have an international panel of judges who make the decisions on which pitches are awarded grants. We offer grants in the amount of $3,000 for the projects that are selected by our judges. That money is to cover the journalist costs, their time, and also their travel. We at Historias Sin Fronteras cover the cost of editing, infographics, website development, some photography, and translation. Now here comes something really important. The journalists hand in the projects in Spanish, Once they're edited, we have them translated to English and to Portuguese, giving us a wide reach across the region. And that's the reason we've been able to publish all the way from Canada to Argentina. Each publication has its own requirements for language, and we're delighted to say we've got it ready to go if you're interested in publishing. We work really hard on the distribution, as you can see from this, a list of very impressive media organizations across our region. And we want the journalist work out there. I think my time is probably running out. It's so exciting to me. As you can see, I could just keep going on and on about this. Please check in with us. We have calls for proposals periodically. We'll have another one coming up probably in a couple of months or so. If you want to send me your email address, I'll put you on the list to let you know about our calls for proposals. And just follow us. I'm on Facebook. We're on Twitter, and we'll keep you informed. I couldn't be happier about the opportunity to work with such tremendous journalists all over the region. They have produced some really, really impressive work. Look at this range of topics, lupus, the impact of migration on mental health, with a focus on the Venezuelan migration in the region. We're just so excited about it. We'd love to work with you in the future. So thanks for the opportunity to talk about this.
Thank you so much, Lynne. I think one of the most powerful stories that I've worked on and read are the ones that are done in collaboration. And, having this interest in the region, I think it's very, very powerful. So thank you for letting us know more about these grant opportunities. And por favor, si alguien en Chile tiene preguntas, por favor háganlas en Twitter con el hashtag SAPeCCT2023 o también en YouTube, y los vamos a estar monitoreando. Sorry, that was just like an announcement for for the questions. Next up, we have Lauren Wolf, who is an editor and the bureau chief of the Americas at Nature. One of the publications that is dedicated to science all over the world. It's truly international, and one of the along with Science, one of the leading magazines who publish not only research but also journalistic pieces. So can you tell us more about? You have a slide already. What's Nature, right? What kind of stories do you publish, and what are the best story, or what are the angles that you want to hear from Latin America?
Yeah, thank you so much, Rodrigo. Really happy to be here, honored to be included. So yeah, I am the bureau chief for the Americas, and I will explain what that means. But Nature, as probably most of you know, is a journal that publishes original research. But what some people don't know is that we also have a news section, a newsroom that publishes news, features, and opinion. We are published by a publisher called Springer Nature, and our newsroom is structured by geographical regions. So I am the bureau chief for the Americas, which means that I am responsible for covering news from North America and Latin America. And then we have other bureaus from Europe and Asia Pacific and the Middle East and Africa. And that's, we're very international. Our headquarters are in London. We try to cover stories globally that way. So even if a story is, about the US, sometimes it's appropriate to talk about other parts of the world. Sometimes it's not, but we always ask ourselves, like, why do people in other parts of the world care about this US story? And vice versa. Why do people in other parts of the world care about the story from Peru? Our audience is first and foremost an audience of researchers and professional scientists, and so we write for them. But we also have a broad audience of just people who love science, love black holes and CRISPR and all of those things that we love to write about, which works out. And then we also have an audience of policymakers. So this is really important to us, is to have impact. A lot of times you'll see some of our stories linked in policy documents or white papers. And again, that's sort of one of our main missions, is to make a difference in the science community and science and policy. Okay, so I thought I would tell you, since that's the big question of like, what are we looking for in writers and stories? And these are just my feelings on the matter, so I just want to qualify that. But when I'm thinking about what kind of writer I want to work with, the most important thing to me is that the person understands our audience and knows how to pitch us, knows what is the story for nature, and pitches it that way. Is there a current event that's going on? What is nature's angle on it? So again, I mentioned our audience are these researchers and science enthusiasts. Why do those people care about this story? And so that's really, really important. Second important thing is just careful, thorough reporting. Those two things are the most important thing to me. I know that people have questions about or worries about, if English isn't my first language, will I get pitches accepted? Will it be hard to get my stories through editing? It's not going to be easy, but that is far less important to me. I can help you structure stories, help you restructure sentences, things like that. It's really the ideas and the reporting, and that comes from you. That's not something that I can do. So to me, those are the most important things. For the stories that nature is really looking for, we try to write about the biggest science that's happening, discoveries that could change a field, science that might have policy implications, science that's surprising, or something that answers a question that's been around for years and years, and also just science that can help people. I know a lot of publications aim for, the sort of blockbuster science that's in these top tier journals, but as we all know, it's science that goes on in the global south isn't always going to be published in those journals. And so really, we want to hear about the science that's making a difference to people in the global south in those countries. We also look for news about science policy, funding cuts and increases in various countries, how that's going to impact the scientists there, scientists' reaction to elections and policies that are happening in countries, news about world-class facilities, lab safety, etc. And then the final category is news about issues of interest to the science community. So this is controversies. Everybody loves a good fight between scientists, fraud and misconduct, lab life, things that are impacting the day-to-day life of scientists working in labs. Are they trying to green their labs? Are they trying to reduce the emissions? And then, of course, discrimination and racism in science. So I thought, after having given you those sort of characteristics of stories that we're looking for, I could give you some examples of stories that we've published from Latin America and kind of explain, you can kind of see those categories and why we publish these stories. So that should hopefully be helpful to help you direct your pitches. But you can see the story here is about Brazil's recent election. This is important to our audience because it's a big country. It impacts lots of scientists. It impacts the climate. So what's going on there is very important, and we want to keep following that. That's why we did one of these stories, which was really excellent. This next story is about a fight. Again, like those things can always be interesting. This is about what to do with the invasive hippos in Colombia. Some people think they're cute and want to keep them. Some people would like to humanely deal with them because they're the biggest invasive animal in any country in the world, and they could be destroying ecosystems. So that's just interesting from a conservation standpoint. It's scientists arguing over what to be done, and that was very interesting to us. And here are a few other stories. There's this story that we did about a big study in Colombia, a bird survey that was done 100 years ago. They're redoing it now. It has implications for conservation and climate, but they're also redoing it to correct the wrongs from the past of how it was done in an very discriminatory way, where they just came in, took the birds and left, put them in museums elsewhere. And we have a story about Chile, about the Constitution. This was important to us, again, because a lot of scientists worked on creating this Constitution. Parts of the Constitution could have affected science in the country, and so it was important for us to cover it. and we covered it at multiple points throughout the process. And then finally, this last example was a story from the pandemic, where there were questions about the official statistics coming out of Venezuela for deaths. And people were questioning, that they were trying to hide what was really going on there. And there were these healthcare workers who were, walking miles and uploading data from their own hospitals to try to paint a better picture of what's happening there. So you can kind of see these are broad issues, interesting stories that really are interesting to researchers, interesting to, people in the policy world, etc. That's all of my slides. I'll just mention very briefly some do's and don'ts of pitching. I mean, I would really agree with everything that Rachel said. I don't have a lot to add, but the top things that I look for, especially in a news pitch, are what is the news, and I very much agree that writing a headline can really help you distill your thoughts and what the story is really going to be about. It might not be the headline that we end up going with, and that's okay, but it helps you really sell the story. So what is the news? Why is it important? What questions does it answer, or what thing does it advance? And then also the next thing that I like to see is, if it's not a breaking news story where this thing has just happened and it's clear why we would want to write about it, if it's a story that's been out there, what is your take? Why is this a story for Nature? What is the angle you're taking that's going to be different than what's been written about elsewhere? Because we want those kinds of original stories. Nice to haves are things like why you're the right person to write the story because you have experience in X, Y, and Z, and maybe the types of sources that you would talk to. But I would say those top line things are the news. Why is this a story for Nature? Why does it matter? And we can talk about some more things during the Q&A. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Lauren. I think all these stories are really important, and I can't get enough of them. We want more stories from Latin America. Next, we have David Malakoff, who's at the competition at Science Magazine, which also covers a lot of international stories, also coming from Latin America. I'm glad you're with us, David.
Yeah, greetings from the driver's seat of my rental car in Miami, where I just spent 20 minutes driving around looking for cell phone service. So I hope you can hear me okay. The advantage of going last is everybody has given you all the great advice. So particularly Lauren's presentation, we could have just slapped the science logo on it, and it could have been almost exactly the same presentation. So what I'll do is quickly walk through a few things that are useful to know if you would like to write for science, and we would like you to write for us. First of all, is to think about who we serve. Like Nature, the core of our audience are PhD scientists, mostly working at American universities, although we have a significant audience in China and in Europe and elsewhere around the world. The print magazine that we publish probably goes to a couple 100,000 folks, mostly at universities. The website has a very different audience. It gets about 5 million visitors a month, and about half of those people we probably never see again. So they come once, they read a story, and then they disappear forever. Our staff is spread around the world. Most of us are in, probably the majority, a small majority are in Washington, D.C., but we have folks all over the world in Tokyo, Mexico City, all over Europe. And so we rely both on staff reporters and freelancers for our international coverage. A little bit about how we operate. We have a daily news meeting every morning where we basically decide what are the stories we're doing that day, what are the stories we're going to do this week, and also what are sort of the longer term projects that may take weeks or months out into the future. So basically you want to get into that conversation, and the way you get into that conversation is by pitching an idea. Personally, I prefer fairly short pitches. Just say, hey, I've got an idea and this is what it is. If you can do all the wonderful things that people have talked about in pitching in terms of writing a headline or telling me why you're the best person to do it, or telling me why you want to do the story now, that is very helpful. But I also don't want you to get hung up spending a huge amount of time investing in a pitch that I'm going to spend 2 minutes reading and then saying no to. So I leave it to you how much investment you want to make, but I'm perfectly open to getting a 5-sentence or a 2-paragraph pitch that just generally outlines the story you're thinking about. The opportunities for freelancers are pretty diverse at Science. Probably the biggest way people get started is they write what are called ScienceNows. These are stories based typically on single research papers, new research papers that have come out usually that week. We usually like to run those stories either the day a paper appears, the week the paper appears, rarely the week after the paper appears. So it becomes what we call the last week story. And then there's the mix of policy news that Lauren did a nice job of wrapping up as well. We look for all the same things. We look for international stories that are going to be of wide interest to a global audience. So an audience that might want to know what's going on in Ecuador or Brazil or China, but it has to be a fairly significant event that would have some interest broadly. I can give you an example. We did a story recently from India about a major radio telescope that is threatened by a new rail line. So for astronomers, that's a broad interest because thousands of astronomers use that instrument and many others are familiar with some of the discoveries it's made. So the fact that it might be knocked out by this electric railway sort of has a broad interest. In terms of a couple of special notes, I'll just touch on quickly. Many writers are interested in writing about environmental issues, which is great. That's where I come from. The thing about Science is we don't do straight environment stories. All of our environment stories have to have a strong research angle. So I can give you an example of how this plays out. I got a pitch from a freelancer in Zimbabwe who said, I want to write a story about how the drought in Zimbabwe has cut off a major source of electricity, which is a hydroelectric dam. And as a result of that, the government is now looking seriously at how to diversify our electrical supply by investing in renewables. And I said, well, that's an interesting story, but for it to be a story for us, we would need a research angle. So why don't you go back and look and see if there's recent research around this constellation of issues, either drought threatening electrical supplies in Africa, or the impact of renewables in the Zimbabwean energy grid, things like that. So the researcher went back and he actually found a handful of studies on those topics, which he then integrated into the story. So the story then had a foundation of new research to layer on this policy development in Zimbabwe. I guess the last thing I would say for freelancers out there that's really important to Science, by and large, is timeliness. We're a weekly magazine, we're a daily website. We really like to cover stuff as it happens. So rarely will we do last month stories. More commonly, we'll do last week stories, but what we really like are this week's stories or today's stories. So the timelier your story is, the more likely it is to get accepted. And I will quit there and take questions.
Thank you so much, David. I thank you all for sharing a little bit about yourselves and your organizations. I wanted to kick off this Q&A with a tough questions. Some months ago, I was assigned to cover the vote on the Constitution in Chile, right? That was one of the first constitutions that had a lot of science, a lot of environmental rights, and indigenous knowledge in it. And my first question was like, why isn't a Chilean journalist covering this, right? And another Mexican, my great friend Emiliano, covered it for Nature. So then it was two Mexicans covering an issue happening in Chile, and of course the language goes a long way, but other than that, I didn't know a lot about Chilean science or the atmosphere, who to talk to. So it was really a challenge, but most of it, I was like, why didn't a Chilean journalist pitch this to Nature or Science or any other outlet, right? So this is just a question. I'm not looking for like an exact or the answer, right? But like, what can Chilean journalists do to be in touch with or get these pitches or stories to you, or even find you, or be like keep your publications on their minds and say, hey, this is gonna happen soon, or this is happening now. How can I get this story to you when maybe my English is not so good, or maybe I don't know how you work with editing or what it needs to be done. Like how can we destroy, maybe that's a big word, but like how can we lower that barrier, to get these stories to your publications?
Well, I'll start because we actually had a journalist in Chile who covered the first part of the constitutional issue, did a preview story for us. She's an American and she helped organize her conference, and she was not available to help us cover the actual vote, which is, I believe, part of the reason Rodrigo ended up covering it for us. But I think the onus is on us, quite frankly. I think one of the big problems is, as Lauren noted, for journalists who are just sort of science adjacent, who may not be science journalists, but who have an interest in the topic or cover things that are adjacent to it, they have no idea that Science and Nature have news sections. I mean, most of them. And that's just a challenge and that we're constantly up against. I think we need to do a better job of being out there and letting people know that, you can, not only can you write for us, but we actually pay pretty well.
Yeah, I'll weigh in on that too. I mean, I agree. In an ideal world, we would like a writer from every country. I would personally love a writer from every country in Latin America and the regions that I want to cover, pitching me stories that I wouldn't know what to. I have so many that I wouldn't know what to do with them, right? But that's not always the case, right? For whatever reason, it's our doing. But then there are events like this that can help us connect with writers in these places. I've tried to go to world conferences and meet international freelancers. It's a long process. It's the finding of where the places are to meet the people, and then finding the people who can do a good job for you and that know what you need and can deliver. I will be honest, like doing stories from some of these places when I'm trying out a new writer, it's a lot of work for me, and I'm willing to put in that work, but I can't do one of those or two of those every single week because it is a lot of work, if I'm being honest, but it's something that I believe in and want to keep doing. And it's just a matter of, continuing to plug along and try to make these connections and find the people that can give you what you need.
I would add to that there's no harm in sending an email to an editor just to introduce yourself, maybe with some clips, and just make them aware of your existence. And if you know that there's a story coming a month or two down the line, you can make the editor aware of that. And you might be able to get an assignment proactively that way as well. Tech Review also has a freelance database. So if you go to the pitch guide that I mentioned at the bottom of our page, there's actually a form that you can fill out that includes your region, contact information, and everything. And we're starting to look at that more seriously when we are thinking about making assignments. Like if we know we want a story covered in a certain area, we're starting to use that. So I think that's something that some other publications do. It's definitely not a universal practice, but you can look for those kinds of places to make your presence known.
Anyone else? Otherwise, I can just also share a little bit of knowledge. Like sometimes you don't have to have a full story and like send a pitch. You can always reach out to editors and say, hey, can we talk for like 5-10 minutes on Zoom? I have these, and like collaborate with the editors, and like figure out what the story is and the angle, and not like putting, like David said, like 10 days worth of work onto a story that might not get commissioned or might have the wrong angle, right? So just contacting an editor and say, hey, do you have 10 minutes that we can talk and chat and or sometimes not even have a story in mind, just to chat and say, what are your stories? Like, I have these ideas, like, would you be interested in one of these? And then you develop a pitch, right? I think all the editors I've met are willing to do that for a freelancer in Latin America or any other country. Please remember, our audience, that we are taking comments, but also questions on Twitter and on the YouTube live stream. We have a question from Lindsay Wessel, one of the organizers. She'd love to hear from the panelists if there are specific countries in Latin America that you see as particularly underrepresented in coverage, or, you know, like Lynne mentioned, now you have the first Chilean journalist collaborating, right? So either in your own publications, but also like in the grants opportunities, or you know, applying to the fellowships in the Open Notebook.
Well, I recently did an analysis, and I think we have never run a story from a journalist in Paraguay, Uruguay, Honduras, Argentina, and there was at least 2 other Central and South American countries. So it's a very wide, at Science, it's a very wide open, it's a wide open field. I was kind of stunned to see that we did not have anybody from Argentina in many years, given the size of the population there.
I would say is that our experience has been, we haven't had many proposals at all from some of the Central American countries. I'm not speaking about Costa Rica in particular, because we have had a lot of really good proposals, but from some of the other Central American countries. And yet when we did have a proposal, it was selected by our panel of judges, and it resulted in an excellent story, a collaboration between a team of reporter and photographers in Guatemala and a team of reporters and photographer in Honduras. And it was superb. And so, you know, I would really encourage journalists, you know, in those countries and others to reach out. We have had a working relationship with journalists in Paraguay, with great results. There's a lot of very, very unfortunate activity going on in terms of the Atlantic forest and the destruction of that forest. And so anyway, that's our experience at Historias Sin Fronteras.
Yeah, in my case, well, Knowable in Español is quite new. We launched in October, and I have been receiving pitches, but yeah, there's a lot of vacancies from different countries. I mean, we've published from Costa Rica, Mexico, Argentina, Colombia. I think that's it. I have some assignments that have been done to journalists in Venezuela, but I'm always open, and I want to have stories from all over. In my previous experience, I have had a larger representation of Latin American countries when I was doing Scientific American in Español, but this is we'll get there. But yeah, I don't know. My wish would be to have at least one freelancer in every country of Latin America.
Similarly, at the Open Notebook, Rodrigo, you asked about our mentoring programs. Historically, our early career fellowship program, which is much more well established. We have the largest number of our applications by far come from Mexico, Brazil, followed by Colombia, a little bit Argentina, very small smattering of applications from other places in Latin America. And our newest program, the Sharon Dunwoody mentoring program, we had very few applications from Latin America overall. And most of those, I think, were from Mexico and Brazil.
Yeah, I would say at Tech Review, almost all of the pitches I get from Latin America are from Mexico and sometimes from Brazil. So it's wide open.
Great. Rachel and Lauren touched on this a little bit, but I wanted to ask you, what are some of the don'ts, recommendations or suggestions that for journalists who are pitching publications on what not to pitch or how not to propose a story?
Well, so there are clear conflict of interest rules. If you work, don't write about your PI. If you're an ex-researcher, you can't write about your PhD advisor. You can't, if you work at a university, you can't write about anything that's going on at that university. If you are engaged in advocacy, you better be very clear with the editor about what your role in that advocacy is, and we'll make a determination about whether that represents a conflict of interest or not. So, those are some just sort of straight up problem areas.
Yeah. I think that's a really good distinction because at least in Latin America, there's not a very clear divide between what we call divulgación and periodismo, so like outreach and journalism, and sometimes that's not very clear. But our international publications, that is something very clear. So thank you for bringing that up, David. Lauren, you also wanted to chime in.
Oh, I think it was Rachel. I will talk after Rachel, but Rachel, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was actually going to say the same thing as David. So conflict of interest are a big one. I would say as a general rule, if you think something could even have the appearance of a conflict of interest, it's best to be upfront with your editor about that, and then have a conversation about it. The worst thing is to have a story come in and then discover close to publication that there's a problem. I would also just say that, I touched on this a little bit when I was speaking earlier, but I feel like the biggest problem is a lack of focus in pitches. And I think it's often an area where you might discover that you actually have to do some pre-reporting before you do a pitch in order to just sort of elevate something from just sort of a vague idea or like a general area to a really sharp pitch. And I feel that's where most of our pitches sort of fail, is they fail to make that transition.
Yeah, I very much agree. I would say there's that where it's sort of a rambling. So, okay, let me say there's news stories and then there's feature stories. So if it's a news story, you need to be very direct about like, this is happening now. Here's why it's a news story. Here's the time peg. Here's why I'm pitching it to you. Features are a little more, narrative. Here's a story. Here's my character. Here's why I'm telling this story. And so those tend to be longer pitches. News can be much shorter and concise. So I see that a lot where the pitches for either of those are very rambling, and there's not, you haven't identified that headline or that through line, or what it is that the news is, or why you're writing about it now. And then sometimes you just get the topic pitch, right? Do you want a story about icebergs in Greenland? That's topic, that's not a story. And it's okay, as we've been talking about, to reach out to an editor and say, would you be interested in a story about X? You still need to give them more than a topic. You need to give them a story. You don't have to write a full pitch initially. We all understand that it takes a lot of time and effort, and we might ask you to do a little bit of reporting before we give you the green light, but it is okay to just say, would you be interested in this? I can give you a fuller pitch later. So those are my top tips.
I would add a couple more. One important thing is, at least for me, is not to pitch the same story to two outlets at the same time. Be aware of that. That will make your editor angry. So
that's the science of nature. You could just pitch us both simultaneously.
That I wouldn't I wouldn't do that. The other thing which I've had is do not send a full article before you've been accepted a pitch. Editors will like to have their own angle or ideas incorporated and not have a full article sent to them just to see if you will publish it. And just as as my colleagues were saying, yeah, have a real pitch, like have something newsworthy, some data that's meaningful, and be sure that we haven't covered it before and that it's really something new for us and for the world. And yeah, those would be my...
On that point, I would add one thing, which is a big change in my career is this thing called the internet. For freelancers, what that means is you really need to look around and see if your story that you're pitching has already been covered widely, even if it hasn't been covered by the publication you're pitching. Exactly. So for example, I often run into a situation where I'll get a pitch from outside the United States, but the Guardian, the LA Times, the big newspapers all over the world have covered that story. So it would behoove you as a freelancer to sort of just look and see whether the story has already gotten, because for us, that makes it much harder for us to do the story. If we know the Guardian or some other very large media outlet has done it, we're going to be less likely to do it, unless you can bring a real sciencey angle to it. Right.
And what about the same question, but for grants or programs or mentoring programs, Siri and Lynne?
Sure. Well, something that I was going to add is, in addition to these kind of substantive types of tips about what to pitch and what not to pitch, there are also a bunch of things that I think of as sort of pitch etiquette. Debbie kind of got at one of those about, like, don't send the entire story. Sometimes people wonder, how soon can they follow up if they send a pitch and they haven't heard anything back? Can you follow up within 24 hours, 48 hours? Do you have to wait 2 months? What is the deal? And generally my kind of blanket advice, it depends on the story and the publication, but in general, I think if you wait about a week to follow up on something that isn't super time sensitive, a week to 10 days, it's fine to send a polite nudge. If it's a real time sensitive story, of course, you might do so sooner. Another thing I really recommend, because editors' inboxes are such a dumpster fire, is to put freelancer pitch in the subject line to minimize the chances that your pitch is just going to get lost or, glossed over as potential spam. And then the final piece of hygiene, I guess, that I would highlight today is to just encourage you to proofread. And that's not to say, again, coming back to, your English doesn't have to be perfect, but if you send a pitch to Lauren and it says, "Dear David," at the top of it, that is going to make the editor wonder, well, Lauren's a really nice person, so maybe it won't be true, but it might make the editor wonder how careful you are. So make sure that you proofread your pitch and avoid unforced errors like that. On the subject, Rodrigo, you asked about fellowships. Fellowships and mentoring programs. The main thing, I think, is to just try to communicate honest answers to the questions that are asked, to communicate who you are, why you want this, how it will help you, what you see as your strengths that you will bring to this program, what you hope to learn. It depends on what the program is and what they're looking for, or what we're looking for in the case of the Open Notebook. But we try to make our eligibility criteria and what we are looking for extremely explicit, and we ask specific questions. So we don't ask people to just write a cover letter, because we don't want people to have to guess about what it is that we're trying to learn. And if you are, I would say just try to be frank, try to, make sure that you're using the space that is given to you. If you're filling out an application and you have a maximum of 250 words for a certain question, and you just give us 20 words, that's not giving us very much information to go on, and it sort of gives the impression that you're just dashing off the application. So do, use the space to show that you've been thoughtful about the process.
Great. Thank you so much for those answers. We have another question from the audience, from Alejandra Manjarres. Rachel mentioned that MIT Tech Review has a database of freelance journalists to be considered for assignments or to be informed of calls for pitches. That's awesome. Do any of the other magazines in the panel, like represented in the panel, or outlets in the panel, have something of the sort?
So we keep my predecessor, Martin Enserink, who's in Chile with some of you, actually put together a fairly lengthy list of our freelancers who are overseas, and I've transferred that into a very sophisticated, not Microsoft Excel spreadsheet. So yeah, we try to keep track of people, but it's a constantly shifting constellation of folks. So it's, I'd encourage you to contact me so you can at least get on the list.
Same here. I know I'm just saying the same thing that science says, but it's very true. We have a huge spreadsheet of the people that we've worked with. We have sort of like contact information, where they're located, what kinds of things they're good at covering, and we try to keep updating that on a regular basis. But it's constantly shifting, and we're constantly adding and removing people, removing them when they get full-time jobs, which is yay. But adding new people as we lose people. And so, yeah, definitely we keep track.
We're all cursing the New York Times for taking away Emiliano.
Yes.
We're very happy for him.
We're very happy for him. But there are limits to our happiness.
Yeah. Well, it's the same for Knowable. We do have a database that grows, shrinks, and so on.
Siri, I think you also keep a list, no?
I am the queen of spreadsheets. I must have 100 spreadsheets. I have lists of people who have written for us, people who have expressed that they would like to write for us, people who I would like to at some point get them to write for us, people who I want to contact when we have a new program and I want them to spread the word, all of those things. I will say that we're actually in the middle of, we're working with a developer now to create a science writer database that will be global. So people will be able to opt into it. And our hope is that it will be a resource that editors can use when they're looking for freelancers, that anyone can use when they're looking to figure out who they want to follow on social media, that people can use when they're putting together panels, that we at the Open Notebook can use when we're suggesting sources for stories. So our hope is that this database will be a valuable resource for a lot of different reasons, and basically a way for people to discover each other in the international science writing community. That's underway with the developer. We're hoping that it'll be ready to start collecting data in the next 6 weeks or so.
I think that's a great project.
In our case, Rodrigo, I have a list of journalists all across the region, and I reach out to them when we're going to have a call for proposals, to encourage them to, here's what the broad subject matter is, here's the deadline, again, all the, requirements like the teams and all of this, and to encourage them to please send in your proposals, a link. We have a simple, I think, a fairly simple questionnaire. We thought it would help journalists, who don't know how to write pitches. If we say, these are the things we want you to respond to in making your proposal for a grant. And, one of them that we've talked about, this is just spun a little bit differently, is we say this bluntly, it is likely that the subject you're proposing has been written about before. What new angle or information do you have that makes it different? And I can't think of any more specific way to say it than that. And that way, again, focus this down, tamp it down for us so we can really see what are you bringing to the table that's new. And so anyway, I do an outreach. I'm always telling journalists, let me know if you want to be on the list, of course, because I'm in the business of trying to reach as many journalists as possible with opportunities, which is what we're all doing today. And so, yeah, that's what we do.
Great, thank you. So bottom line, get on the editors lists. Reach out to them. We have another question from Edith Escalon from Veracruz, Mexico. She says, I want to know if you have any kind of protection or support program for journalists who are pitching stories and must report on violence context of violence, like the ones we have in Latin America. You mean like narcos or caciques, violent situations overall. There's also a lot of stories that require environmental reporting where it might be dangerous. So do you have any kind of support like that for freelancers?
Let me weigh in on this one, Rodrigo. I mean, we talk with the journalist very carefully and very specifically about what risks they think they might be running when they go out. We're working on a story now where it is really, really very dangerous. It's very tense. And, we want to know, what are your protocols? Who are you going with? Check in with us. Let us know where you are and step back. If you feel like you're, in a situation that could be dangerous, step back from it, because, the reporting's not worth it. And it's very true. They're very risky, and especially in the environmental area, this is a very dangerous situation. And so we do discuss that with the journalists before they're going out. We certainly do not encourage them to go alone. We want to know, who else are you going with? Yes, I think it's very important for journalists to talk with their editors about that. As we say, don't be brave, let us know, what the potential risks are, and let's decide together, what we want to do and how far we want to go and where we want to hold the line on that.
Great. Thank you so much, Lynne.
Yeah, I would say, there's the physical, like the reporting trip danger. And yes, I have definitely had reporters go places where, you make sure that they're checking in with you once, like, I need to hear from you once a day by this time to make sure that everything's okay. And we talk through those things also. But if we're talking about sort of, also there's just this sort of online threats and hatred that journalists have to deal with regularly. We do have, we've had training for our reporters, and there's resources we've gotten from PEN America as one place, but we kind of go through that training. I make sure that if a freelancer is working on a story like that they understand what their digital hygiene should be. We have newsroom policies about if they're being threatened, who to report that to, and then how we escalate it up the chain to our legal team and things like that. So we try. I mean, it's a really hard problem, but those are just some of the things that we do.
Yeah, I think echoing what Lynne said, it has to be a conversation, from the start, I think. And it's worth remembering that more about the safety profile of whatever you're going to be going into than your editor will. So I always advise my freelancers, if there's anything outside your comfort zone, it deserves a conversation. Oftentimes there are workarounds that, won't require you doing what seems to be like the most direct, the direct thing, and you can still get what you need. We also offer similar, we offer some protection and around online harassment as well. So the conversation continues even after a story comes out. We want to make sure that if we think there are going to be any sensitivities before publication, we have a good plan in place.
Great, thank you. We have room for one last question from from Zach Savitsky, who is in Chile, listening in person. Do you think there is a higher bar for international stories than there is for US-based ones? And if so, how can journalists from Latin America make sure they cross that threshold?
Yeah, so at Science, you know, we're essentially an US-based publication, and a large proportion of our core readership is in the United States. So yes, there is certainly a higher bar. You know, we will do a lot more stories about the US budget than we will about the Chilean budget or the Brazilian budget or the Mexican budget, science budget. So yeah, there's a higher bar. At the same time, reporters who are based outside the United States have an edge, I think, in terms of placing features and other kinds of stories, because they simply have access to stories that our reporters in the United States do not have access to. So it's a bit of a mix.
Maybe one last answer and we'll be on our way. Yes, anyone?
Well, I can add to that. So in the case of Knowable and Español, we're actually looking for stories that are based from Latin America or that are of some interest or different interest for Latin Americans in the US. So we are focusing on those stories. And it is interesting because these stories get translated into English and they actually do very well. I think they bring a different story to a media that probably is listening to the same things. So this is a little bit different, and they do well. So we are looking for those stories.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for your questions, and thank you for these amazing panelists for sharing your knowledge and give the audience some tips to how to, you know, collaborate more with international media. Thank you, Debbie, Rachel, Siri, Lynn, Lauren, and Dave for chiming in and allowing us to listen to your thoughts, and hopefully many stories and will come out from this session, right? Thank you also to Aleida and Lindsay, who organized this session. Thank you to Corina Ortega and Jose Ramon Sanchez and the Zoom committee from the Red Mexicana de Periodistas de Ciencias who helped us behind curtains. And I hope you have a great time in Chile. Keep enjoying the conference. Thank you all.